I'm telling the truth. These symptoms are not from stress. They're from a poison she has been feeding you, Yolanda pointed. You are a staff. I've been with my fiancé for 2 years. What would you know about her trying to kill me? You're lucky you still have your position intact. Yolanda knew her boss was in danger, but how could she save him if he not only didn't believe her, but also laughed at the absurdity of her words, with the woman who was actively killing him slowly? If you're ready to find out how this disaster unfolded, then buckle up. Yolanda had been inside that house for 11 months, and nobody had ever really seen her. Not the kind of seeing that counts. Not the kind where someone looks at you and registers a person rather than a function. She moved through the J estate the way good household staff always move, with quiet precision, invisible by design, present without being felt. The lights were always on when they needed to be on. The schedules ran without friction. The health protocol was managed to the minute. And nobody ever thought to ask who made all of that happen, because the kind of work that never fails is the kind of work nobody thinks about. Yolanda Osei was 25, South African, and the best household manager the J estate had ever had, though nobody had ever said that to her face. She had a stillness about her that people mistook for simplicity, a quietness they mistook for compliance. She noticed everything. Every shift in temperature between two people in the same room, every habit that changed by 3 degrees and why, every detail that didn't quite sit where it was supposed to. It was her job to notice. She had always been good at her job. She just didn't know yet that noticing was about to cost her everything she thought she had here. Jay Juan was 30 years old, and he ran the kind of empire that had 2 faces, one that appeared in board meetings and business journals and charitable galas, and one that the city of Jehul whispered about in a different register entirely. He was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had built everything he had through a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that processes a room before the room has finished settling, that reads a situation 3 moves ahead of everyone in it, that trusts systems because systems don't lie. People could lie. Systems couldn't. That was his rule. That was always his rule. And Una Beck had spent 2 years learning exactly how to become a system he trusted without question. She was 28 years old, and she was the most disciplined performer Yolanda had ever watched up close. Gracious in the way that makes you feel chosen, warm in the way that makes warmth feel like a gift being given, rather than a thing being spent. She had been engaged to Juan for 2 years, and in those 2 years she had made herself indispensable, to him, to his mother, to the architecture of the household itself. Mrs. Su Myung-suk had championed her from the beginning, had sat at the head of the dinner table and looked at Una the way you look at something you built with your own hands. Una had calibrated her performance to fit every person in that house, every person except Yolanda, because Yolanda was staff, and staff were furniture, and you don't perform for furniture. That was Una Beck's only mistake. But it was the kind of mistake that destroys everything. The health protocol had existed for 2 years, before Yolanda, before Una even. It started after a cardiac episode that Juan quietly managed and more quietly refused to discuss. A structured daily regimen his private physician Dr. Lim had designed, and Yolanda maintained with the same precision she brought to everything. Supplements at 7:15, the morning cardiovascular drink at 7:30, specific meals at specific times, a log she kept in a small notebook, dates and details, because precision was how she worked, and accountability was how she trusted herself. She had never questioned the routine. It was the foundation of the day. Until 11 weeks ago, when Una decided to add something to it. She arrived one morning with a recipe she said she'd found, a natural supplement drink, something she'd researched, something for his stress levels. She'd prepared it herself, she said. She wanted to do something for him. Mrs. J was at the breakfast table when Una presented it, and she had looked at her future daughter-in-law with an expression so full of approval it was almost painful to witness. Yolanda had noted it in her log. Una's morning supplement drink introduced, prepared by fiancé personally, subject consumed without hesitation. She had not thought anything of it, not then. The first episode was 6 weeks later. Fatigue, the heavy, wrong kind, the kind that doesn't lift after sleep. Then vertigo, intermittent, twice in 1 week. Then, on a Thursday morning, Yolanda was setting the breakfast table, and she watched Juan's left hand tremble against his coffee cup for exactly 4 seconds before he closed his fist and it stopped. She noted it. Dr. Lim came. He adjusted the protocol. He used the word stress the way doctors use it when they mean, I am not certain. He said overwork. He said rest. He said the tremor was likely tension. The episodes continued. Yolanda started going back through her log on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after the first episode, sitting at the small desk in her room with the notebook open and her reading glasses on and the quiet of the empty house around her. She laid the episodes out in sequence, dates, times, what came before, what followed. The pattern assembled itself in front of her like a sentence she hadn't meant to read. Every episode followed the morning supplement drink by 4 to 6 hours. Not stress, not overwork. The drink. She sat with it for 4 days, went back through it again and again looking for the other explanation, the coincidence, the variable she had missed. She found none. On a Wednesday, she quietly obtained a small sample of the drink from the kitchen. Una prepared it fresh each morning, and the remainder sat in a sealed container until it was cleared. She labeled it. She used her own salary to have it tested at an external lab, the kind that asks no questions, because she had no standing to ask official ones. She was staff. She was furniture. The results came back on a Monday. The compound was real. It was slow-acting, it accumulated in the bloodstream over time, and it did not announce itself as anything other than fatigue, vertigo, cardiac irregularity. At current levels of exposure, Dr. Lim's notes would start showing organ involvement within 6 weeks, maybe 8. This was killing him. Yolanda sat at her desk with the lab report in her hands, and the silence of the house pressed around her, and she did not move for a very long time. Then she said to herself, "What do I do?" She didn't say it like a question. It wasn't really a question. Yolanda didn't battle her feelings much before she requested a private meeting with Juan. He granted it the way he granted everything, efficiently, 5 minutes between calls. What she didn't expect was Una already in the room, seated in the chair closest to his desk, legs crossed, coffee cup in hand, like she belonged in every room of this house by divine right. She looked up when Yolanda entered, and smiled the particular smile she reserved for staff, warm enough to be polite, brief enough to be dismissive. Yolanda looked at Juan. "I'm sorry, I requested for a private meeting." "Una is my fiancé," he said simply. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of her." Yolanda pressed her lips together. How exactly was she to tell him what she had found, when the woman behind it was right there to deny it? "Sir, this is really time-sensitive and private. So you will either say it now or leave," Juan cut her off curtly. Something moved through Yolanda's chest. She looked at Una. Una looked back at her over the rim of her coffee cup, pleasant, patient, completely unbothered. The expression of a woman who already knew she had won this room before it started. Yolanda set the documents on his desk. She walked him through it. The log, the pattern, the timeline of episodes mapped against the drink. The lab report last, placed directly in front of him. He read. Una did not move. When he finished, he set the papers down. He didn't look at Yolanda immediately, he looked at Yuna first, and whatever passed between them in that look, Yolanda couldn't reach it. Then he passed the papers to Yuna, everything Yolanda had discovered, now in Yuna's hands. Then Juan looked at her. You paid for this test yourself. Yes. She had lost her voice. Using what evidence, exactly? Your personal log. Yes, the pattern is documented across. I've read it. He closed the folder. I don't find grounds for this. Yuna set down the documents then, slowly. She looked at Yolanda with an expression of such careful compassion it was almost architectural. What I see here is that she's developed an attachment, honey, Yuna said, gently to Juan, as though Yolanda were not standing 3 feet away. Juan was already nodding, the kind of nod that isn't agreement, it's conclusion. It happens, especially with staff who've been in a household long enough to feel involved. She tilted her head. It must be difficult, watching you plan a life with someone, having feelings you can't express professionally. That is not what this is, Yolanda said. The room went quiet. Yuna blinked. Juan looked at her. It's a lab report, not a love letter. I would ask that you read it as one. The symptoms you've been feeling are not from stress. They're from a poison she has been feeding you. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Then Jihan stood. The symptoms I've been feeling are from a cardiac attack suffered years back that has refused to leave me be, which you would have known before you went around chasing a goose if it were your place. You're lucky you still have a position here, he said. Return to your duties, Miss Yolanda. Yuna smiled at her. The warmth was entirely gone from it now. Just the shape of a smile, worn like a mask that had stopped trying. Yolanda held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her documents. She had to reach for them herself, no one offered them back, and she walked out. Behind her, she heard Yuna make a small sound, soft, like concern, like poor unstable thing. And then she heard them both laugh. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious way, just the quiet, easeful laughter of 2 people who have just confirmed something they already believed about the world, and about where certain people belong in it. Yolanda closed the door. She walked down the corridor to the kitchen, which was empty at this hour, and she stood at the sink with her hands braced against the counter, and she looked out the window at the garden, and she breathed. In. Out. Steady. You still know what you know, she told herself. A man laughing at you doesn't change the lab results. She filed her documents away in her room, filed the embarrassment somewhere deep inside that her hands couldn't reach even if she tried, and she went back to work. That evening, Yuna found her in the kitchen. There were no other staff present. Yuna leaned against the counter with the ease of a woman in her own home, which she wasn't, not yet, but she wore the house like she already owned it. I want you to understand something, Yuna said pleasantly, the way you discuss the weather. Juan is mine. This house is mine. Everything you see when you walk through it will be mine inside of 8 weeks. She smiled. I don't know what you thought you were doing today, but I want you to understand that it didn't work, it will never work, and the only reason you're still employed here is because you're very good at your job, and I have no desire to inconvenience myself finding your replacement. Your staff know your place. She pushed off the counter, started toward the door. Oh, she paused without turning around. Congratulations on your concern for his health. It was almost convincing. She left. Yolanda stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she rinsed the glass in the sink, dried her hands on the cloth, and went upstairs. She was not done. Drop a heart if you felt that, because Yuna Bake just made the worst mistake of her life, taunting someone she underestimated, and she did it wearing a smile. Keep watching. The next 2 weeks were Yuna's weeks, and Yuna knew it. Small things first, tasks redirected to Yolanda that sat below her position, linen inventory, delivery management, things the junior staff handled, corrections in front of the household. "Yolanda, darling, these were supposed to be white, weren't they?" said with such warmth that the critique felt like affection. Yolanda took it all and gave nothing back. She was gathering, she was watching, she was waiting for the thing Una would do when she felt completely safe. Safe people get careless. That was another thing her job had taught her. The morning of the brunch, the Jai family home was full. Mrs. J's closest friends, 2 aunts, Juan's business associates, the kind of gathering that Mrs. J staged with the particular precision of a woman who understood that social occasions were another form of architecture. Yolanda managed the service from the sideboard, quiet and seamless, the way she always managed everything. She was refilling the juice when Una reached across the table and placed Juan's hand over her stomach. The table went still. "We've been waiting to share this," Una said. Her voice was the voice of a woman barely containing joy. "I'm just a few weeks along, so we wanted to be careful, but I couldn't wait any longer." Mrs. J made a sound that Yolanda had never heard from her before, something unguarded and complete. She reached across the table for Una's hand, and her eyes were bright, and in that moment she was not the formidable architect of the Jai family's social world. She was just a mother who believed her son was going to be a father. Juan smiled. He turned to Una, and there was something real in his face, something that didn't belong to the performance, and Yolanda thought, for just a moment, he doesn't know. He genuinely doesn't know anything. And that was the worst part. She stood at the sideboard and kept her face at exactly the temperature it always was, and she finished filling the glasses and left the room. In the corridor, she stopped and stood with her back against the wall, and she closed her eyes. She forced the tears back. Then she went back to work. Again. "Tell me, are you watching this from your phone or your laptop? Drop your country in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you found this story, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next, I need you to be ready." Yolanda almost missed the letter. She was already awake when it arrived, 5:47 in the morning, the sky outside her small window still the dark blue of almost dawn. She heard nothing, saw nothing, but when she opened her door to begin her day, the envelope was on the floor. No name on the outside, nothing to indicate where it came from or who had slid it under. She opened it standing in her doorway. Inside, a single page, Juan's handwriting. She recognized it from the household correspondence she managed. Brief, controlled, precise. "Don't be afraid of what you're about to see today. Stay in the house. Trust the process. I believed you from the moment I read the lab report." That was all. She read it twice. She stood in the doorway of her small room in the pre-dawn dark, and she read those 12 words at the end. "I believed you from the moment I read the lab report." And something solid cracked wide open in her chest, something she wasn't prepared for. He knew. He had laughed with Una in that study, and he had let Yolanda walk out carrying the weight of being disbelieved, and he had known the entire time. He had his own plans, and he needed Yolanda by his side. She put the letter in the pocket of her uniform. She didn't know what was coming. She only knew she was supposed to stay, so she started her day. At 10:14 in the morning, Jae-won collapsed in his study. Yolanda was in the east corridor when she heard the sound, not a dramatic sound, the wrong kind of sound, the quiet thud of something falling that shouldn't be falling. She moved before she'd made the decision to move. She pushed through the study door and through the cluster of staff already forming at the entrance, and she was in the room. He was on the floor. The scream that tore through Yolanda's mouth wasn't controlled at all. It was agony. Pure agony. The details of the next 30 minutes existed in fragments later, when she tried to reconstruct them. Dr. Lim was already in the building. She registered that somewhere, a fact she wasn't ready to look at directly. The staff were cleared, she was the last one out, and someone had to take her by the arm to move her to the doorway. She stood in the corridor with her hand pressed flat against the wall, and she waited. 42 minutes. Dr. Lim came out. He spoke to the senior staff gathered in the corridor. She watched his face while he spoke. She watched the faces of the people listening. And then she knew. Jae-won was dead. She walked to the end of the corridor. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and she pulled her knees up, and she put her hand over her mouth, and she cried. Quietly, thoroughly, the way Yolanda Osei did everything, with complete attention, nothing held back. The staff around her moved carefully. Nobody spoke to her. She was invisible, still, even now. The letter was still in her pocket. She knew exactly what she was doing. Yuna arrived 53 minutes after the call. She came through the front door of the J estate, and the first thing she did was look for Yolanda. She found her in the entrance hall, composed now, standing with the particular straightness that was just Yolanda's spine in moments of professional necessity. Yuna looked at her. She tilted her head. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose that's that." She walked past her into the house. Yolanda stood in the entrance hall and watched her go. Inside the next 2 hours, the house changed. There was grief in it. The staff moved quietly, faces down, the specific heaviness of a household that has just lost the person at its center. And moving through that grief like water through stone, precise and purposeful and completely unbothered, was Yuna Baek. 3 phone calls, 2 emails from Juan's private office, where she sat at his desk with the ease of someone for whom a desk is just furniture. A conversation with her personal assistant in the small sitting room off the kitchen. Yolanda passed the door and did not stop walking, but she heard 2 sentences. Enough. The pregnancy. I only needed it for intestate succession. The assistant murmured something, and Yuna said, "It was always just the performance, but it has gotten me what I need, everything Juan owned." Yolanda kept walking. The lawyers arrived at 1:30 in the afternoon. They set up in the formal dining room. Yuna sat at the head of the table, Juan's chair, and she opened the first folder, and she began. His body was still upstairs. She did not go up, not once. She was just moving with as much speed as she could manage, like she wanted everything done yesterday. Pause this video right now. I need you to really sit with that. His body is still in the house, and she is downstairs moving his assets into her name. Have you ever seen a villain this clean? Comment 1 word below, even if you've commented before, just 1 word, now, that describes Yuna Baek right now. I'll be reading every single one. Yolanda went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. The room was small and quiet, and the sounds of the house reached her distantly. The low voices of lawyers, the movement of staff, the world reorganizing itself around an absence. She reached into her pocket. She took out the letter. She read it 1 more time, slowly, the way you read something you need to understand completely. Don't be afraid of what you're about to see today. Stay in the house. Trust the process. I believed you from the moment I read the lab report. She sat with it, and then she put a finger to what her tears in the corridor had actually been for. Not grief for Juan. Juan was alive, somewhere in this house, with Dr. Lim, with whatever plan he had built without telling her. Her tears had been for Yuna, for the fact that Yuna had chosen this, for the specific human tragedy of someone who could have been anything and chose, carefully and repeatedly, to be this, for the pregnancy she had invented and discarded in the same breath so she could take everything Jae-won had worked for in 30 years, for his chair she had sat in before the body was cold. Yolanda had cried for Yuna the way you cry for something that could have been saved and wasn't. Then she stood up. She straightened her uniform. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser for exactly 5 seconds. She put the letter back in her pocket. She walked out of her room. The timing of Mrs. J's arrival had been calculated to the minute, though Yolanda only understood that later. She came through the front door in the particular state of a woman who has received the worst phone call of her life and has not yet had time to become the person who has received it. She was calling for Juan before she was fully through the door. The sound of his name in her voice was something Yolanda felt in her chest. The formal dining room doors were open. Mrs. J saw the lawyers before anyone could redirect her. She saw the folders. She saw the documentation spread across the table. She saw Una at the head of her son's table. She didn't understand what she was seeing. Not yet. Una rose. The mask came back on with extraordinary speed, grief assembling itself across her features like a practiced thing. She crossed towards Mrs. J with her hands outstretched, her voice soft and wrecked. "He's gone," Una said. "I've been trying to hold it together for the arrangements." "Mrs. J." Una stopped. Yolanda was at the foot of the staircase. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. She simply spoke, and something in the quality of her stillness made every person in that entrance hall turn. Mrs. J looked at her, a long look, the look of a woman who had spent 11 months barely registering this person, and now, for reasons she couldn't yet name, was paying complete attention. "He's asking for you," Yolanda said. Silence. Una's face did something complicated, but she almost controlled. "He's upstairs," Yolanda said, and she turned and began to climb. Mrs. J followed. She climbed those stairs like people climb stairs in dreams, with the feeling that the ground beneath her was not entirely stable. Yolanda walked ahead without looking back. She pushed open the door to the room where Juan had been all afternoon. Mrs. J went in first. Yolanda stood in the doorway. The sound Mrs. J made when her son opened his eyes was not a word. It was not even a sound that had a name. It was the specific noise of a woman's world reconstituting itself from nothing. She crossed the room and reached for him, and he held her, and for a long moment there was nothing in that room except that, a mother and her son, which was the most ancient and sufficient thing. Then Mrs. J pulled back. She looked at his face. She held his face in her hands like mothers hold the faces of children who have come home from somewhere frightening. She was looking for the proof that he was real, that he was whole. She found it. Over her shoulder, Juan's eyes found Yolanda's across the room. She was standing at the foot of the bed with her hands clasped in front of her and her back straight, and there was something on her face that she hadn't complete control over yet. Relief, and behind it, something that wasn't quite pride, but lived in the same place. He held her gaze. He didn't say thank you, not with words, but the look was a full conversation, and she read every word of it. Then Mrs. J pulled back from her son and looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had just been pulled back from an edge she didn't know she was standing on.
"What," she said carefully, "is happening?" Juan sat up. He straightened. The man who had been dying an hour ago gathered himself with the efficiency of someone who had never stopped being in control of the room. "Let's go downstairs," he said. Una was still in the dining room when he walked in. She had not moved. She was standing behind the chair, his chair, with one hand on its back, and when Juan came through the door, her face did something that no amount of performance training could have prevented. The shock went through her like current, and for one unguarded second she was simply a woman watching something impossible. Then her mind started running. Yolanda could see it. Behind Una's eyes, the calculations beginning, the reframing, the angle that might still exist. She was extraordinary under pressure. She would give her that. Juan crossed the room and stood on the other side of the table. He placed one folder in the center. Una looked at it. She didn't move. "Asset transfer documentation," he said, time-stamped, initiated 91 minutes after my death was announced. He looked at her steadily. While my body was still in the house. He stepped back. Yolanda stepped forward. She placed a second folder beside the first. Internal system recording, Yolanda said. The sitting room is part of the household monitoring system. It has been since before I was employed here. She opened the folder to the relevant page. This is a transcript of a conversation that took place at 1:07 this afternoon. The phrase, "I only needed it for the performance," refers to the pregnancy. The room was very quiet. Then she placed a third document, the lab report, the original, the one she had paid for herself, the one she had brought to Juan in that study 8 weeks ago, the one he had smiled at her across while Yuna laughed. Yuna looked at the table. She looked at Juan. She looked at Yolanda, and in that look was the first completely honest thing she had shown in this house since the day she arrived. Not contempt, not amusement, something that recognized, finally and too late, that she had been looking at the wrong person for 8 weeks. "You used the Maid," she said. Her voice was almost wondering. "She found the truth," Juan said. "I stayed out of her way." Yuna moved then. She pushed off the chair, and she began, and Yolanda had to admire this, even now, she had to acknowledge the architecture of it. She began to build a counter-narrative in real time. The documentation was circumstantial. The lab report was unofficial. She had been preparing that drink for his health. She had records. She had the recipe. This was a misinterpretation of grief, compounded by the actions of a household employee who had clearly had a personal agenda from the beginning. Juan placed his hand flat on the table. "Yuna." One word. No elevation. No heat. Just the word. She stopped. "The asset transfer is already in the legal record," he said. "You transferred 3 accounts in the 91 minutes you believed I was dead. That is already done and already documented, and it doesn't require my testimony or Yolanda's to exist." The room heard that. Everyone in it heard that. Mrs. J, who had not spoken since they came downstairs, who had been standing against the wall near the door, she heard that. Something moved across her face. Yuna's mouth closed. She stood there, and for the first time in 2 years, the performance had nowhere left to run. All the architecture was gone, the warmth, the calibration, the smile that made you feel chosen. What was underneath was something very human and very terrible. Not a monster, someone who made a choice a long time ago and kept making it even when it stopped being simple. The specific grief of someone who built their own trap and couldn't stop walking into it. She straightened. She picked up her bag from the chair. She looked at Juan one last time, and there was nothing left in it except the exhaustion of someone who has been performing for 2 years and cannot perform anymore. She walked to the door. The moment she opened it, 2 members of the legal enforcement team who had been positioned in the entrance hall were there. Yuna looked at them. She looked back at the room, at Juan, at Yolanda, at Mrs. J against the wall, and then she looked at nothing, and she walked forward. The engagement was dissolved before sunset. Legal proceedings were filed that same evening. If this story hit somewhere real, if you've ever been doubted when you were telling the truth, if you've ever had to carry something alone and keep going anyway, share this video right now. Someone in your life needs to watch this today. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? This channel tells the stories that stay with you. 3 days later, the house was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the quiet of grief, not the quiet of crisis, the deep, settled quiet of a place that had expelled something wrong from itself and was still learning what it felt like to breathe clean air. Mrs. J asked Yolanda to come to her sitting room in the morning. Yolanda came. She sat in the chair across from Mrs. J, back straight, hands folded, the way she sat in every professional meeting in this house, the way she had always sat in rooms where she understood her position. Mrs. J looked at her for a moment without speaking. Outside the window, the garden was gray and still. At the brunch, when she made her announcement, I watched your face. Yolanda said nothing. I thought, she stopped, started again. I saw something in your face and I misread it completely. I thought it was jealousy. She paused. It wasn't, was it? No. The garden outside didn't move. A bird crossed the window briefly. I told myself a story about you, Mrs. J said, and she said it carefully, like someone reading from something she wrote the night before and needed to get exactly right. About what you were and what you weren't, and what you were capable of. It was a convenient story. She looked up. Convenient stories are very dangerous. I understand that now. Yolanda held her gaze. You saved my son's life. The woman I chose nearly ended it. And you, who I had decided didn't belong in any important room of this house, you were the only one who could see clearly. A pause, long enough to mean something. I owe you an apology that I don't have sufficient words for, so I will simply tell you the truth of what I know now. You saw my son when none of us did, and I will not forget that. She didn't reach for Yolanda's hand. She didn't fill the moment with warmth she hadn't earned yet. She just told the truth, which was its own kind of beginning. Yolanda looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way you acknowledge something that deserves to be acknowledged. And she stood, and she thanked Mrs. J for her time, and she returned to her work. The question Juan asked her 3 weeks later was not the question she expected. He found her in the East Corridor at 7 in the evening, later than she usually stayed, but there was a household audit she was completing, and he said, without preamble, "What do you actually want to do? Not here, in your life. What do you want?" She looked at him. "I'm asking you," he said, not impatiently, not with any weight other than the question itself. "I want to know." She told him, not everything, not all at once, but the shape of it, the things she thought about in her small room over 11 months of invisible work. A household management firm, her own, building something that ran the way things should run, building it from the ground up, on her own terms. She had the skill. She had never had the resources. He listened the way he had listened to her in that private room off the lobby 6 weeks ago, fully, without the part of his attention that was always running calculations somewhere else. When she finished, he said, "What would you need to begin?" She told him that, too. He nodded. He said, "I'll have it arranged by the end of the week." "I'll pay it back," she said immediately. "It's not a loan." He looked at her. "It's a correction of what should have been possible for someone like you a long time ago." She didn't have a word for what moved through her in that moment. She had several languages in her blood. Her mother's, her grandmother's, the English her father taught her in London before he brought her home to Lagos, and none of them had the specific word for what it is when someone sees the fullness of what you are and simply decides to respond accordingly. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Don't thank me. I'm correcting a debt." They stood in the East Corridor of the Jai estate in the evening quiet, and neither of them said anything else for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then she said, "I have 3 more pages of the audit." And he said, "I'll let you finish." And he walked back down the corridor, and she watched him go. And she stood there for exactly 4 more seconds before she went back to her work. The morning Yolanda noticed that things had changed, she couldn't have told you the specific moment it happened. It accumulated, the way all real things accumulate. Hawan asking her opinion on the household restructure and actually using it. A morning where she arrived at the breakfast table and Mrs. Jai was already seated and looked up and said good morning in the direct, unhurried way you greet someone you've decided to actually see. Small things, consistent things, the kind that don't announce themselves. She stayed, not because her position required it. She was building her own firm now. The paperwork was already moving. She stayed because the Jai estate had become something she hadn't expected it to become. Not a place she worked, a place she was part of. That was a new thing. She was learning the shape of it. One day, 12 months later, Jai Hawan was in his office at home. On his desk, next to the business journal and the household accounts from the estate, sat a small framed photograph. Not staged, not taken by a professional, Jai Hawan and Yolanda at the east corridor window, the one she stood at for 11 months of invisible mornings, taken by one of the household staff who happened to have a phone out. Neither of them was looking at the camera. They were looking at the garden. She was still. He was watching her be still. And his expression was that of a man who finally understood that the thing he was looking for was never loudness. The things that last are always quiet. Drop a heart if Yolanda Osei's story made you feel something, if you've ever carried the truth alone and kept walking anyway, if you've ever been the person in the room that nobody thought to watch. This is what I want you to take with you from this story. Una Beck performed love for 2 years and nobody saw the lie. Hawan Jai trusted systems and nearly died because of it. Mrs. Jai built a perfect family and almost built it around the wrong person. And Yolanda Osei, who no one registered, who no one considered, who stood at the sideboard when the pregnancy was announced and kept her face at exactly the right temperature, Yolanda was the only one in that house who was simply, completely, quietly real. The truth doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. It just needs someone willing to carry it when carrying it costs everything. What was your favorite moment in this story? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story found you today, if it hit somewhere that needed hitting, share it. Someone in your life needs to watch this. You already know who. Subscribe to this channel, because the best stories are always about the people nobody thought to watch. I'll see you in the next one.